So our first guest, his name is Michael. Michael fought back against a homeowners association in Atlanta and he won. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Michael, what is going on? Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for sharing this story, because I openly tell people it's not just my individual story, and I had so much other people reaching out, giving support when they realize I'm not just fighting on behalf of my particular HOA, but I'm also trying to advocate for change across the state. So yeah.
It is awesome. When you reached out to me and I saw this, I'm like, these are the kind of stories that people need to hear more about, because I think a lot of times people are in situations and we're like, well, what can we do? Well, you were in a situation with your HOA and you
Yep.
did fight back.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to explain to people how you did that. And then I want to show them part of this video clip here.
Yeah. So a few years ago during COVID, we know many people lost their positions. It was a very tough time for many people. A lot of people are still dealing from that. I was lucky enough to where I did maintain my day job at the time, but I was looking to explore other avenues and other sources of income. So I decided I would venture into real estate. One of the easier barriers, or one of the easiest entries into the field is, typically condos, a lower income area. And just because it's a lower income area, I wanted to provide quality housing. Just because it's lower income or potentially housing choice voucher, formerly known as Section 8, doesn't mean, it has to be a slumlord-like environment. So I bought a few units in South Atlanta. I could tell from the outside it was really rough. And then during the closing process, the HOA president was extremely hostile. And so I actually needed to get an attorney in order to even close on my property. I learned the reason it was such a hard time for me to close was because she wanted the properties for herself to add to her monopoly in the community, because she owned 30% of the units. So I basically had to hire an attorney who was a real estate litigator to threaten them and say, look, under Georgia law, my client has the right to buy this property and you have to turn over the required closing documents, what's owed, any unpaid assessments, and you need to provide any other documents he needs to close. And so once I got an attorney, within 3 days, after fighting for 2 months, within 3 days, I got the necessary paperwork to close. That's what I knew. This was going to be a battle, but I'm not one to shy away from a battle. And at that point, I knew once I got in there, after I finished my rehab, I would have to do what's now known in the community that I'm a part of in Atlanta with real estate investment. I would have to conduct an HOA rehab. And that's exactly what I did. And so once I started rehabbing my unit, I learned from Atlanta Housing that they said the inside of your unit, beautiful, bravo. Unfortunately, we're not going to approve this for Section 8 because the exterior is horrendous, which I agreed with. And so I said to the HOA, look, can you just repair these roofs? Could we do something about the boarded up units? And it was just one runaround after the other. And I started talking to other people in the community. They said, look, nothing's going to change. Or, hey, this lady is corrupt to the T. All of them are. Like, take your losses and leave. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to take those losses. And so I did my due diligence, went through my bylaws, the covenants. This is stuff people need to read. I glanced at it during the closing, which I had to find out on my own, by the way. And I read it and I was like, you know what? There's a lot of power as an owner that you have in here. You don't have to wait for something to happen to you to exercise your right. Like, these are your rights. And so I have the right as a unit owner to have the roof repaired because the HOA is responsible for the exterior. So she refused to fix the community. She refused to hand over financial documents, which was a huge red flag. So no budget. And then no elections, because I was an owner there. I'm like, hey, when are we having a meeting? Hey, we're having an annual meeting April. April came and went, no meeting. And then when I finished my unit, I started pushing and pushing harder, and she snapped. And I bought my unit in March 2021. In January 2023, January 18th, and I remember that day because she threatened my life. She threatened my family. I stayed up all night creating a website exposing every crime. I looked at my bylaws again. I looked at my governing documents. And I can also look at Georgia state law. They were violating dozens of laws, demanding HOA in cash, refusing to have an annual meeting, refusing to provide board minutes, which is Georgia law and in our bylaws. Like I said, refusing to make the necessary fixes. So I said enough is enough. I started preparing legal documents, and the law firm I ultimately went with basically cut and paste what I had on my website. And we ended up going under what's known as a derivative action. If you don't know what that is, a derivative action is similar to a class action lawsuit, but basically anyone could do this in an HOA or any organization really, but it's basically a lawsuit saying, hey, I'm part of this organization. Will you, the court, look at what this organization is doing and say, hey, we need to make a change because the organization is destroying itself. So in a derivative action, you need 5% of the members to proceed with whatever action you're attempting to change. I think I ended up having between 30 to 40% of all of the owners sign on as a show of force. I needed 5%, but I wanted to show that this was such an issue in this community. And so they didn't respond to anything. They said they were going to hand over documents, set up a meeting, bailed on us. They set up a second meeting, bailed on us. They didn't respond to the lawsuits. And then ultimately, I personally sent them, because we tried to service them. They were using an abandoned warehouse in a different county as the HOA headquarters, believe it or not. And so we used private process service, the sheriff in DeKalb County to serve them, even though we're in Fulton County, Georgia. And so we had them served. They showed up in court and tried to get the lawsuit dismissed, claiming they weren't served. But the judge saw through their scandalous ways, and what she did was allow us to do what's known as a service through publication. Basically meaning you're using an abandoned address, the sheriff confirmed it, we're publishing the lawsuit in the paper. And they clearly knew about the lawsuit because Atlanta code enforcement cited the HOA for busted sewage, the falling apart roof, and the leaks. And in that litigation with code enforcement, the HOA president, Claire Cherry, and her attorney told the court, hey, could you please postpone all of this? There's another lawsuit in Fulton County Superior Court. But at the same time, they're claiming to Superior Court, they didn't know about the lawsuit. So the judge saw through that. She granted the default motion in my favor, allowing me to be the HOA president because I was actually voted in during a special meeting, which they didn't acknowledge. And so June 10th, she signed that default order. They filed a motion to set aside the judgment, which is one step below an appeal. And she, 2 weeks ago on August 15th, denied their motion to set aside. And so I could continue on to effectively run the HOA and make the necessary changes so, people don't have their rights violated. So that's the story in a nutshell. There's, a lot of other nuances, but yeah.
Yeah, I think more people need to hear about this because I was talking with my comrade JB earlier about some of the things that happen with homeowners association and just some of the things that people go through. Your story was actually on the local news. I want to show people part of this. You guys got to see this. It says how one man's $30,000 battle exposed Georgia's broken HOA system.
There's no reason this should have been left like this for years.
It is a flurry of activity Michael Shepard has waited too long to witness. A team of tow trucks takes away abandoned cars, some with bullet holes.
Somebody was in there, I'm pretty sure. Would not have been pretty.
Leaking roofs are getting fixed, and the trash bins that are themselves trash are getting removed.
Clearly, they're rusted out.
But before you celebrate the story of how a good guy wins,
Back up.
listen to the battle.
Do not touch me.
I didn't touch you.
Do not.
For 2 years,
Is that her?
That is her. She was actually arrested on this day for assaulting me because I called the media. So she was livid, and actually she was arrested by APD, and ultimately they let her plead down to like disorderly conduct, and she had to do community service or something like that. But she's very deranged.
Wow.
we have walked the roads in Peyton Place as property owners pointed out the problems.
I'm Rebecca Lindstrom with 11 Alive. I was trying to reach you.
And we've confronted the HOA president about the board's lack of solutions. Frustrated, Shepard says he put code enforcement on speed dial.
Code enforcement agents did start taking more reports on a lot of the issues.
Shepard says he went to more than 20 hearings between City Magistrate and Fulton Superior Court. We also attended, watching as efforts to hold the HOA accountable kept getting delayed. The city solicitor wouldn't talk with us about the challenges, but state lawmakers did have something to say.
I am thankful for people like him that stood up, spoke up, and said enough is enough.
Several Democrats in the House and Senate have tried for years to pass HOA reforms to help homeowners like Shepard.
You can get a hearing, but what is a hearing without a vote? We have to come down to this Capitol, talk to the legislators about why we can't get a vote and get some action taken.
Let's be real. You can't get much passed in Georgia without Republicans on board, since they do control the House and Senate.
Does that make a difference?
Absolutely. I mean, that's yes. I mean, I'm not going to lie about that.
Senator Matt Brass admits the issue wasn't on his radar until about a year ago, when a homeowner in his district begged for help.
When I realized it was a problem in my backyard, I wanted to fix it.
Senator Brass has since introduced a bill to create an administrative hearing process so homeowners can hold their HOA accountable.
There's going to be a panel that decides who's right and who's wrong.
So I think this is really important because, again, it just goes to show you how sometimes politicians don't pay attention to something unless it happens in their community, right? But this part right here at the very beginning, I think it switched on me. But
I said yesterday, I believe it.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. I think it went to the other video. Anyway, at the very beginning, there were cars that were there that looked like these were just abandoned cars. Why were they on the property?
So, and this happens in a lot of communities in Atlanta where people think, nobody's watching. A lot of communities, whether they be apartments or in this case, believe it or not, a condo with an allegedly inactive HOA, they'll see the property and say, you know what, this is a good spot to dump, a stolen vehicle, or this is a good place to open up a chop shop. So, yeah.
But shouldn't the HOA have had that removed?
100%. You just saw one of the egregious vehicles. I think that they were going to show more maybe before the video cut out. Maybe they included it. But the one that had bullet holes, that was removed. That was there for over a year. Wow. And so we removed 4 vehicles that day. There was a couple others that I told our new partners to not tow it because I got in contact with the owners and they said they would remove the broken down vehicles. And I don't look at the HOA board as some iron fist. I'm bored or I'm taking out something on somebody. It's about working and improving the community, whether they be a renter or an owner. Because in that community, the vast majority of individuals, with the exception of one, is actually a renter. So I'm trying to work with the people there, whether they be renters and owners, to do the right thing. So
yeah. Well, I have to ask this question. It almost seems like they didn't want to fix the roof, which is a big issue. And It almost seems like similar to what I've seen here in Boston, where a lot of times they just let the property fall apart.
To be honest with you, I've been in the community for, I almost said 2 or 3 years. It's actually been coming up on 5, which is crazy to think about. Felt like yesterday when I just got the keys and took off the plywood. But I think what her goal was, and I did have a rapport with her, believe it or not, after closing, when I kept pushing her to make the improvements, but she flat out told me her goal was to make millions of dollars. And you're thinking, well, how do you make millions of dollars with a rundown property? When she controls 14 properties that she got for virtually nothing, I believe ultimately the plan was to let it get run down to the point where the city ultimately condemns the property for being a nuisance property. And then there's usually a payout. Now they would pay pennies on the dollars. So for most owners, virtually every owner except for her would get pennies on the dollar. So my unit got an evaluation for once the rehab was completed, approximately 136, almost 140. When they come in eminent domain your property, in a lot of cases, you don't get what your true value is. So even if they said, hey, we're going to give $30,000, $40,000 to her, that would be a great amount of money because you take 30 to 40 and times by all of her units, that's knocking on $1 million or so. But for everybody else, that's a horrendous deal. But she got all of her units for the equivalent of $4,000 or $5,000 each, according to the property records. So that was her goal, in my opinion. Based on the fact she told me she wanted over $1 million for all her properties, that's where I'm led to believe. And the sad part is, if she put in the effort I did into my unit, just half the effort, her properties would easily be worth in the millions, but she's not willing to put in the work. She's letting people live in slum-like conditions. Because of this experience, I actually have Legal Aid of Atlanta and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. That's our local major hospital that services, minors, because I had to give referrals for people tenants in her unit who are breathing in mold. And the only reason I'm stating to you that right now is because I have the text messages. I have a mold expert confirming it's mold. And so, like I said, I'm just trying to do the right thing, not only for myself and other people in the community, but people who are at disadvantage. She was able to get away with this behavior for years because, one, it's a poor community, it's a poor Black community, and they don't have advocates, sadly. And even if they want to advocate for themselves, oftentimes I was on a three-way call with tenants and legal aid just to help articulate the situation that they're in. So
that's exactly This is exactly where I was headed, because I've seen this happen. We have it happen here in Boston as well. Yeah. They let the property fall apart, especially to the point you brought up mold. I've seen mold, like black mold in properties here. One in particular, Mildred C. Haley Apartments, which they said that they were going to put $50 million into the community. What that really meant, as people found out, is that they let it fall apart. They kicked the people out. It is a payout. You brought up something very important. That's why I say follow the money, because they're like, oh, we'll just let it fall apart. And then, the people will go somewhere else and we can build something else here or whatever. But it is a payout. And that there's a lot of people doing this, whether it's HOA, whether it's the city, whether it's landlords, like you said about eminent domain, which these things still happen today. People are still displaced, like from their homes, et cetera. So I think it's great that someone like you was willing to stand up. She seemed a little hostile there. Like the way that she approached you in the video, it was just alarming to me.
Yeah, I kept my distance. Because, I didn't know how the situation could go. When the reporter stuck the mic in her face and was like, explain this behavior, I didn't say anything. I was there in the distance. She made a beeline right towards me. Didn't say anything. She left the reporter and came right to me. It was a crazy situation.
Yeah. And it happens. And I just think people need to be really aware of this. But to your point, something you mentioned earlier, people need to know their rights. Mm-hmm. People need to know the laws. And I think a lot of times people just don't. So, kudos to you for looking into that information. So looking up the law, what the Georgia state law says. I highly recommend everybody else do this as well, because sometimes you have more rights than you realize. Now, the landlord and HOA, they're not going to tell you that.
No, they're just gonna let you be ignorant until you stand up for yourself. And one thing I kind of missed in this is most HOAs will actually, even if they're reluctant, they'll even give you a fake budget just to go away pests, right? One of the things I learned throughout this process is the reason she didn't give any ledgers or documents is it turns out she actually owes over $250,000 for self and unpaid HOA. So she wasn't even eligible to be on the board to begin with. So that was the main thing where even if she wanted to give something, she couldn't. And a lot of people were surprised because a lot of people are delinquent on their HOA dues. Well, one thing was she was asking for payments in cash, which no HOA in America should be doing that at all. And then there's also evidence that I have evidence presented to the court that they admitted to putting HOA money into private bank accounts. That's not according to me. That's according to their own words. And that's one of the reasons they ultimately, lost that case. And so you mentioned people need to look up the laws and know the laws, but sadly, in Georgia, I can't speak for every other state, but in Georgia, even if you know the laws, you shouldn't have to spend $30,000, $40,000. You shouldn't even have to spend $5,000 on getting the bare minimum of what's required. I've been to a number of Georgia state hearings on this, and I want to plug one of it, if you don't mind, on the Georgia State Capitol that people should be aware of. But even knowing your laws, you still can end up in the same position that I did. Because I was very familiar with HOAs because I've had previous run-ins outside of an investment community. But even when you know the laws, they need to actually have HOA oversight. Like, I think I don't know what my future holds entirely, but one segment will definitely be housing rights and advocating for HOA oversight, because I went to a state capitol event earlier this year. I was in front of Senator Matt Brass and State Senator Donzella James. And so a Republican and a Democrat coming together to figure something out, because this is not a partisan issue. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, liberal, conservative, something in between, or to one extreme or another, you can run into this issue. And so I think the leaders need to realistically look at what can be done. And I'm a huge advocate of not only HOA oversight, but HOA enforcement. Because a lot of states, like in Florida, they have an ombudsman, but what's the point in having an ombudsman if you go there, they listen to you and they go, oh, well, the decision is not binding. Guess where that leads you? The exact same position that I was in, having to spend that kind of money. And that's completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable.
Yeah. Ombudsmen, unfortunately, don't really do anything.
Not that they don't have the enforcement power. They need to have that power and enforcement. And I sat there and watched. Yeah, I'm on the other side now, so I'm happy to go back when the legislative session starts, because some of them probably looked at me as a disgruntled homeowner, which I'm not. I'm advocating for my rights and everyone else's rights. And it's so funny when you start advocating for your rights, you become, persona non grata or some disgruntled person when you're just saying, hey, like, I don't even want extreme change. I just want my rights. I just want my rights. But I watch these attorneys, and it's such a racket because you have these property management companies, you have these HOA attorneys, you call them for your issue. They go, oh, we can't help you. But they'll represent an HOA and continually bill them tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And I sat there and watched one attorney state, we don't need any change in Georgia. If a homeowner has an issue, they just have to refer to their bylaws, or they can have a special meeting. Well, guess what? I referred to my bylaws. I referred to my governing documents, had a special meeting, and my HOA said, kick rocks. Then what? Spend $30,000 in a lawsuit? No, we need some kind of HOA regulation that's actually binding. And if that doesn't work and one party wants to appeal, then so be it. But to have an HOA and jump straight to a $30,000, $40,000, $50 lawsuit, that's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. And I have to say, just because people need to hear this, just because someone lives in Section 8 housing doesn't mean that you should allow the property to just fall apart. And that's what it seems like to me, that she just didn't care. Yeah. She just wanted the money.
Yeah, well, the slumlord money, yeah. And then I don't want to repeat hearsay, but she'll rent to certain elements of society that, let's just say, don't have a W-2 and doing whatever it takes. And so she'll rent to these individuals and organizations that she'll demand 3-6 months in advance because they'll be in jail or dead. Like it's a very high crime community. And so what we're doing now, I'm getting quotes for gates, security cameras. I'm working with APD because we have a number of trespassers and murders that happen. And with the exception of one individual, of all the shootings that's happened, only one individual actually lived there, whether they be a victim or an assailant. So we just have all these random elements, whether it be squatting, we're combating squatting. We ban plywood. Now, if you have a unsecured unit, you need to make sure it's boarded up in an acceptable manner that's tamper-proof. And another thing that I also started doing is, once again, there's a lot of people with substance abuse, mental illness in Atlanta. Other cities have this too. You don't necessarily even have to call the police because they may or may not respond. They have a policing alternative and diversion, where you can call them 311 in the case of Atlanta, and they'll send out mental health experts who have resources, whether it be to a food bank, to a shelter, or to emergency housing, because a lot of people don't want to go in shelter. So I'm just leading the way to try to get change. And I think I'm in the final phase of that, and hopefully I could come back, sometime next year and give you an update with where we are, because this is not over. She's off of the board, but she still has a number of units in there, and we're doing what we can legally to make sure she cannot be a slumlord anymore in Peyton Place. So, yeah.
Well, Michael, kudos to you. Kudos. When you reached out, I was so happy to hear this because, like I said, people need to know that they have rights and how you can fight back against these entities. Thank you so much. Anything else coming up that I should look forward to?
Just one thing. I actually just got this before I logged on. So in Atlanta, in the state capitol, in room 307 CLOB. It's an Urban Affairs Committee, and they're going to be holding a session on HOA oversight. They're going to be discussing SB 106, SB 107, and SB 108. This also includes rent control legislation. So if you are in Georgia, I don't care if you're in Savannah or down in Valdosta, if you can make it to the state capitol and have your voice heard for this, like I said, this is a bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter what community you're part of. You could be in $1 million homes, or you could be in Peyton Place. You're going to run into many of the same issues. So I would say come down to the state capitol, advocate for your rights. If you can't make it, reach out to your state senators, your state reps, and let your voice be heard.
Awesome. All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Again, congratulations for doing the thing.
For sure.
Congratulations. And again, like I said, I always think it's great when people are out there fighting a good fight.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.